The smell of warm peach pie drifted through the screen door, mixing with lake air and bug spray. I wiped my hands on my apron for the 5th time and adjusted the pie server that didn't need adjusting. From the back porch, the scene looked like a postcard. Early summer sunlight flickering through sycamores, cousins tossing frisbees near the dock, folding chairs unfolding on the lawn like a well-rehearsed ballet. Inside, I shifted between kitchen counters, adding last-minute touches to the dessert spread. 2 berry pies, 1 key lime, and the double chocolate bundt cake Garrett used to beg for on birthdays. I'd been up since 5:30, not because anyone asked me to, but because this is how I've always shown love, through flour-dusted countertops and the quiet comfort of enough food to feed an army. From the open window, I heard Jamie shriek with laughter as Lila tackled him into the tall grass near the hydrangeas. Their energy was boundless, beautiful. I paused to listen. The kind of joy that couldn't be staged. Behind me, the back door creaked open. "Mom," Blythe said brightly, "we might want to keep the pies inside a bit longer. The sun'll melt the crusts." Her voice was pleasant, practiced. I nodded without looking. "I'll wait another 20 minutes. A pause, then, 15, max. We don't want the filling to get runny. Trust me, I've done these kinds of setups. Done these kinds of setups. The phrasing sat in my chest like a weight. She breezed back out, her voice rising again as she called across the yard to Garrett, already directing chairs and cocktail napkins, as if she'd always lived in this house, always hosted these events. Dean wandered in from the side entrance, sunglasses perched on his head. "Need another set of hands, Care?" I smiled, grateful. "Grab those paper cups. Blythe wants lemonade served in something casual but photogenic." He snorted. "God forbid we use a regular glass." That got a real smile from me. Dean had always seen me, the real me, even when we were kids. I used to braid his hair and hide his comic books under my mattress when our mother threatened to toss them. He repaid the favor with fierce loyalty and occasional doses of well-timed sarcasm. I moved to the fridge and pulled out the deviled eggs. The tray clattered slightly, and I winced. Lois entered from the side porch, already balancing a mason jar full of forks. "Where do you want these?" "Buffet line. After the coleslaw." She shot me a wink. "It's perfect, Caroline. You outdid yourself again." "Not according to Blythe," I said under my breath. She heard me, paused. "She's a bit much sometimes." That was the kindest way anyone had ever put it. The screen door slammed again and Blythe reappeared. "Caroline, can I rearrange the dessert station just a tad? I'm thinking visual balance. The pies and the bundt are too same height." "I think it's fine," I said, still smiling. "Sure," she replied, already moving things. "It's just easier to keep the aesthetic tight." I stepped aside, watched her hands shift plates and swap utensils as if I hadn't spent the morning placing them with care. Garrett came in, kissed her cheek. "Babe, this looks amazing," she beamed. "Thanks, honey. I figured it needed a little help." He turned to me. "You good, Mom?" "I'm fine." And I was. Fine. In the way a worn cushion is, familiar, molded to everyone else's comfort, slowly fraying at the edges. Outside, someone cranked up a speaker, and Stevie Wonder floated across the yard. Jamie ran by with a super soaker, barely dodging Lois's legs. Lila plopped onto the grass beside Dean, handing him a daisy crown she'd made while hiding behind the grill. I stayed in the kitchen, wiping down a clean counter. Later, as we stood in a circle saying grace, Blythe cut in mid-sentence when I fumbled over words. "It's okay, Caroline," she said with a laugh. "We all know what you meant." My cheeks flushed. Garrett gave my shoulder a squeeze. "She's just nervous," he said lightly. The moment passed. Plates filled, kids squealed, laughter returned. I watched from the patio door, pie server still in hand. Once I was the center of these gatherings, the planner, the glue. Now I was a piece of furniture, reliable, necessary, but never the focus. Not quite invisible, but not entirely seen. I told myself this was aging. Transition, grace. But somewhere deep inside, behind the practiced smiles and soft yeses, something flickered. A question, a memory, a voice I'd buried under pleasant for far too long. And it was getting louder. The next morning, I set out the lemon scones while the rest of the family wandered into the kitchen one by one, still bleary-eyed from late-night board games and second helpings of peach cobbler. Blythe came in last, dressed already in pressed linen, her hair curled and glossy. She looked like she was hosting a morning show, not a family breakfast. "Caroline, you're such a treasure," she said, inspecting the scones. "Do you ever sit down, or are you on some kind of old-fashioned domestic autopilot?" She laughed lightly, and others chuckled along, unsure if it was meant to be a compliment or not. I smiled. Old habits. That's all I ever said. Always the soft answer, the easy nod. Blythe had a way of layering her words, syrup on top, vinegar beneath. She never raised her voice, never insulted outright. But she knew how to dismiss with a glance, to correct with a smile, to undermine by suggesting better. I had once admired her poise, her ability to command a room without seeming to demand it. Now I understood it for what it was: camouflage. It wasn't always this obvious. It started years ago quietly. Christmas, 4 years back. I'd brought out the heirloom ornaments, the ones Garrett made in elementary school, the delicate felt angels and lopsided reindeer. Blythe pulled me aside, her voice low and gentle. "These are sweet," she'd said. "But I think the tree might look more cohesive if we stick to a silver and white theme this year." I'd agreed. I always agreed. The next year, Thanksgiving. I was halfway through prepping stuffing when she breezed into the kitchen, phone in one hand. "I texted the caterer," she said, not even looking up. "Just so we're not all chained to the stove all day." I nodded, even though I'd been looking forward to that stove all month. It wasn't just the cooking, it was mine. My ritual, my rhythm, my way of creating space for others. Now the space was curated, controlled, supervised. Garrett, for his part, drifted along in her orbit. He never disagreed with her. Not once. If I raised an eyebrow, he'd brush it off with a half smile. "She's just got a system," he'd say. "You know how she is." Yes, I knew. At breakfast, she handed out color-coded name tags for a family scavenger hunt she'd designed. "It helps the kids bond across generations," she said. "Plus, it keeps everyone moving." Dean mouthed, "God help us," to me from across the room. I didn't wear my name tag. No one noticed. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the back deck for some quiet. I passed the open sunroom where Blythe was chatting with 2 of Garrett's cousins. "She's more like a mascot than a matriarch," Blythe said with a chuckle. The others laughed. I froze. The word dug in deeper than I expected. Mascot, a decorative figure, cheerful, non-threatening, harmless. I turned away before they saw me. I walked to the tool shed and sat on the wooden bench staring at my hands. Mascot. That night, I opened the iPad Garrett left charging on the kitchen counter, looking for a recipe. His text messages popped up without prompting. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. There was a thread, group chat labeled Family LOLs, dozens of images, screenshots, memes, most of them of me. One, a photo of me napping on the porch swing with the caption, "When the help forgets it's not 1952. Another of me arranging silverware captioned, "Her royal cutleryness is at it again." There were others, side-by-side photos comparing me to a vintage housewife ad. A screenshot of a text Blythe had sent. "She's sweet, but she's basically furniture with an apron." My stomach flipped. I scrolled further. Some were recent, some dated back years. Garrett had liked several, left emojis, replied with LOL more times than I could count. I didn't cry. I just sat there, the tablet warming against my lap, the screen glowing soft and cruel. I'd always known Blythe didn't respect me, but I hadn't known how gleefully she made a game of it. And Garrett, my son, he didn't just ignore it. He joined in. I set the iPad down gently, stood, walked to the pantry and poured myself a glass of water with steady hands. I'd spent decades being useful, being soft, being flexible. I had shrunk when needed, risen when asked, smiled when it hurt. Now I was someone's punchline, a mascot in my own home. It was subtle, this kind of cruelty, but it was real, and I wasn't imagining it. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd begin writing things down, not for them, for me. It rained that morning, soft, steady, the kind that settled in tree branches and made everything smell like damp cedar and rusted memory. I left the breakfast dishes half done and walked out to the tool shed, pretending I needed to grab a trowel. What I really needed was air, space, silence not filled with careful corrections or thinly veiled jokes. The shed was where Arthur used to escape when guests overwhelmed him. It smelled like oiled wood, sun-bleached plastic, and old tomato seed packets. I eased onto the bench near the window and let the door shut behind me, the echo loud in the stillness. I sat there for a while, listening to the rain against the tin roof, trying to remember when I started swallowing my own voice. It didn't begin with Blythe. It began long before, in a house painted white with navy shutters, 2 stories tall and entirely too quiet. My mother had a way of moving through rooms like a knife through satin. Deliberate, efficient, cutting. Nothing in our home was spontaneous. No magnets on the fridge, no dirty dishes left to soak. Every pillow fluffed, every door closed with intention. She wasn't cruel, not exactly, but she was distant, emotionally antiseptic. She believed that a well-run house was the same as a well-loved child. She praised obedience, punished excess. Emotions were to be folded and stored, not displayed. Even her affection felt rehearsed, like she'd read about it in a parenting column and tried it out for show. I remember standing in the hallway once, maybe 10 or 11, listening to her explain to a friend on the phone that I was a good girl, quiet, never any trouble. I thought I should be proud of that. I was, for a long time. She used to say, "You get further with a smile than with a scream." I took that to heart, smiled when I wanted to shout, nodded when I wanted to run. I made myself agreeable, likable, non-threatening. I didn't know then that I was turning myself into something easy to ignore. When I met Arthur, I mistook his silence for safety. He was kind, dependable, gentle. After my mother, that felt like freedom. He didn't ask much, didn't push. I told myself that was love, being needed but not asked to take up too much space. Our home together was quieter than most, but warmer than the one I'd come from. Still, I fell into old patterns. I made the beds before he was even out of them. I filled the house with casseroles and calendars and never let myself take the last piece of pie. I raised Garrett the same way. Polite, careful, clean. I didn't teach him to speak up because I'd never learned how to myself. And now, Blythe. Blythe with her curated smile, her subtle criticisms, her need for order disguised as modern motherhood. Watching her, I saw shades of my mother. Poised perfectionism, firm control, affection that felt conditional. Blythe didn't scream. She didn't have to. Her silence had weight. Her compliments always came with an asterisk. The way she smiled when she moved my pies. The way she looked at me when I offered a suggestion. The way she spoke for me when I hesitated, as though I couldn't finish a sentence on my own. It wasn't just that she didn't respect me. It was that she didn't see me at all. And Garrett, he didn't push back. He never had. He stood where Arthur once stood, passive in his peacekeeping, letting the current take him wherever it flowed easiest. I had raised him to be gentle, but I hadn't taught him how to protect what mattered. The rain grew harder. I pulled an old rag from the workbench and wiped down my hands, even though they were already clean. I didn't know what else to do with them. On the wall across from me hung Arthur's old rake, his gardening gloves still curled on the shelf like hands waiting to work. The sight of them made my throat tighten. I reached for the small box tucked under the bench, a wooden crate where I kept garden twine and seed envelopes. At the bottom was a notebook I hadn't touched in years. I opened it slowly. Only a few pages had writing on them, old planting schedules, notes about fertilizer ratios, the occasional reminder in Arthur's handwriting. I flipped to a blank page, stared. Then I wrote, "She called me a mascot," and everyone laughed. Garrett laughed. I have been quiet for 64 years. My hand shook slightly as I pressed the pen harder. I don't know how to be loud, but I'm so tired of being easy to ignore. I put the pen down and let the silence take me. The tears came slowly, one after the other, until I was curled on the bench, forehead pressed to my knees, sobbing into my sleeves. Not just for the reunion, not just for Blythe, but for every time I'd smiled when I wanted to scream. For every compliment I gave that tasted like chalk. For every time I'd told myself being pleasant was the same as being loved. I cried for the girl in the navy-shuttered house who learned early how to disappear. For the wife who called silence peace. For the mother who mistook obedience for strength. I cried until there was nothing left but breath. When I finally looked up, the rain had stopped. The light through the shed window was golden now, soft and forgiving. I wiped my face and stood. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll keep writing. Maybe not for them, but definitely for me. Lila was curled beside me on the porch swing, her knees pulled up under her chin, hair tangled from a day of lake water and lemonade. The light had softened around us, golden and heavy, the way it gets just before dinner time when shadows stretch long across the grass. I was threading a fresh ribbon into the hem of her sun hat when she asked it. "Why does Mommy tell you to go away when it's our family time?" The thread caught in my fingers. I looked at her. She wasn't being cruel. She wasn't even frowning. She was just asking. Children do that. They speak the things adults are too polite or too frightened to say out loud. "I don't think she means to make me go away," I replied softly. "She says it a lot," Lila said, "like when we were doing the memory jar. She told you to let us have space." I remembered that moment. I'd offered to help Jamie spell campfire on his slip of paper. Blythe had stepped in, her hand light on my shoulder but her tone brisk. "Let's let them do it on their own. It's important they associate these things with us, not just everyone." I'd smiled, stepped back. I always did. Lila pressed closer into my side. "But I like when you're there. You remember stuff." I kissed the crown of her head. I remember everything. A few days earlier, Jamie had been drawing in the dirt with a stick when he said offhandedly, "Mom's the boss of everything, huh?" I looked up from the basil I was trimming. "What do you mean?" "She tells Daddy what to do, and you, and even Lila. She's like the boss of the house." "She just likes things a certain way," I said, though the words felt false even as I said them. He nodded like he understood more than I realized. That night, after everyone was in bed, I remembered a conversation Lila and I had shared last winter when they stayed over during a power outage. She'd been helping me sort puzzle pieces by the firelight when she whispered, "Mommy has mad moods. Sometimes she throws things, but only when it's just us." I had told myself she was exaggerating, that kids confuse tension with drama, that Blythe was stressed, busy. But now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I found Lila at the dining table with a stack of markers and a large piece of paper. She was drawing a family tree for a summer traditions project they were doing with the cousins. "Want to see?" she asked. I nodded. She walked me through each branch, pointing to names she'd written in uneven block letters. Garrett, Jamie, Dean, even Lois. But not Blythe. I didn't mention it, just looked at her, waiting. She shrugged. "I couldn't figure out where to put her. She always says she's not into labels." It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't spite. It was a child trying to make sense of what felt like distance. That night, I started a journal. Not the planting one I'd scrawled in out in the shed, but a new notebook, tucked between my sweaters where no one would look. The first entry was only a few lines. Lila asked why her mother keeps sending me away. Jamie called her the boss. I think they know more than anyone's willing to say out loud. I think they see it too. Each day I wrote a little more. I wrote about the comments Blythe made when no one else was listening, about Garrett's silences, about the way my name was used less and less when the family made plans. I wrote about Lila's drawing and Jamie's shrug. I wrote about Arthur's absence. How, if he were still here, things might be different. The journal became a thread I clung to, a lifeline in the rising tide of erasure. I just finished writing when the printer in the office began whirring. Confused, I walked in and saw a page spilling out from the tray. An activity schedule for the next day that I hadn't requested. On the corner, Blythe's name was listed as the sender. I paused. Something about it didn't sit right. Curious, I opened the family tablet resting on the desk, the one Garrett had gifted me for birthdays and photos. I checked the recently used apps. One stood out, obscure, labeled in gray. I clicked it. A list populated, browsing histories, locations, screen logs, even keystrokes. My heart stuttered. The device was being tracked, my notes, my searches, my writing monitored. I checked the phone settings next. Same program, hidden in a folder labeled Utilities. Blythe had installed tracking software. She was monitoring what I read, what I typed, what I said in messages. Suddenly, the joking, the nicknames, the controlling felt like more than passive aggression. It felt like surveillance. I powered down both devices, hid my journal inside the linen closet behind the spare pillowcases. Then I sat down on the floor, back against the cool wood of the hallway, knees pulled to my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But I knew now that this wasn't just about being unwanted or ignored. It was about control. It had always been about control. And I was done letting them decide how small I needed to be. It was just after dusk when I asked Garrett if we could talk. The rest of the family had gone down to the dock for marshmallows and night swimming. The sky outside was streaked with orange and lavender, and I could hear Jamie squealing about the cold water. I poured 2 cups of tea, his with honey, just how he liked it as a boy, and brought them to the screened-in porch. He sat with his phone on the armrest, thumbing through messages, half listening as I began. "I need to talk about something that's been on my heart," I said carefully, placing the cup in front of him. He looked up, smiling politely. "Sure, Mom. What's up?" I hesitated, then started slowly. "I've been feeling dismissed. Not just recently, but for a while now. Blythe, she tends to speak for me, make decisions around me. And I don't think it's intentional cruelty, but it's eroding something I can't ignore anymore." Garrett leaned back, arms crossed loosely. "She's just efficient, Mom. You know how she is." I nodded. "Yes, I do. And that's the issue. She has a way of being efficient with people's space, with mine." He tilted his head. "Are you sure this isn't about something else? Maybe you're just tired. You've been doing so much lately. All the prep, the events. Maybe you need a break, some rest, or even talk to someone." "Talk to someone," I repeated flatly. "A therapist," he offered. "To help you manage—" He paused, searching for the word. "Expectations. You seem overwhelmed." My heart clenched. "So now I'm imagining it?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." I met his eyes. "You were raised by someone you no longer see." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means I taught you how to be kind, but not how to stand up when kindness isn't enough. It means I kept the peace so long that you don't recognize when it's being broken, only when someone dares to say it aloud." He stood, agitated now. "I'm not going to stand here and let you paint Blythe as the villain. She's trying. She's built a life for our family." "And I've helped build it too," I said, voice low. "In every way I knew how. I stayed quiet, I stayed useful, but I won't be invisible." He took a breath, brushing his hand through his hair. "This is why I think you need to talk to someone. Get perspective. Blythe isn't trying to hurt you." "No," I said. "She's just erasing me politely." He didn't respond. The silence felt final. After he left, I stayed on the porch for a long time, staring into the dark where the fireflies hovered above the lake's edge. Dean found me there an hour later. He sank into the wicker chair beside me with a soft grunt. "So," he said, "how'd it go?" I looked at him, tired. "He thinks I'm losing touch, that I'm overreacting." Dean sighed. "Garrett's always avoided conflict. You know that." "I raised him too," I admitted. "Still, you sure you want to poke the bear right now? It's a reunion. Maybe let it slide?" "Neutrality's just complicity with better manners," I said before I could stop myself. Dean looked at me, surprised. Then he nodded slowly. "Damn, you really are fed up." "I'm bone-deep tired of pretending this is okay." Later, as the night folded in on itself, I went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. Through the window, I saw them all gathered around the fire pit, marshmallows skewered, wine glasses raised. They toasted. I couldn't hear what for, but I saw Blythe at the center, smiling like a politician, and Garrett leaning in close. Lila sat beside her, stiff, like she wasn't sure where to put her hands. I wasn't missed. No one looked for me. They toasted without me. And for the first time, I didn't feel left out. I felt clear, because now I knew what came next. The long harvest table on the back lawn had been set with fresh hydrangeas, vintage glassware, and cloth napkins that I'd ironed that morning before anyone woke up. Candles flickered in mason jars. The sun had just dipped behind the tree line, casting golden shadows across the lake. 25 relatives leaned in with full plates and buzzing conversation. From the outside, it looked like joy. I took my seat at the end of the table, 3 chairs down from Garrett, far enough from the head to be convenient, close enough to look engaged. I was lifting my glass to sip when Blythe stood to make a toast. She tapped her knife against her wine glass and smiled like a pageant queen. I just want to thank everyone for coming out to this year's Reynolds Family Weekend. Our biggest gathering yet. Scattered applause followed. She went on. So many people made this happen, but we've got one MVP I'd be remiss not to mention. My stomach clenched. Her smile widened. Caroline, she said, raising her glass in my direction. Our little mascot, always there, always smiling. A pause. Then a wave of chuckles. Awkward. Forced. Someone added a hear hear that died halfway through. Garrett gave a closed-mouth grin, looking down at his plate. The laughter lingered just long enough to feel like a performance. I tried to laugh with them. Or, at least pretend. My lips parted, but no sound came. Mascot. It echoed in my chest, bounced around like a rubber ball in an empty gymnasium. I placed my glass down, hands steady, face still. No one said a word. Not Dean, not Lois, not Garrett. No one came to my defense. The meal continued, but I didn't taste a thing. I nodded at jokes I didn't hear, smiled when people made eye contact. Inside, I was unraveling stitch by stitch. After dinner, I slipped inside through the side door, unnoticed. The kitchen was quiet, the remnants of dessert trays and stacked dishes waiting for attention. I didn't stop there. I walked straight to the pantry, the light buzzed overhead. I pulled the door shut behind me and slumped down onto the stool Arthur used to sit on while tying his boots. The air smelled of cinnamon and old wood, familiar in a way that hurt. I reached up to the top shelf, behind a box of tea lights, and pulled down the cardigan he used to wear in the evenings when he grilled, navy blue, threadbare at the cuffs. It still smelled like him, faintly like smoke and cedar. I pressed it to my chest and wept. I cried for the way my son looked away. I cried for the space I used to hold and the shell I'd been assigned. I cried for the women before me, my mother, her mother, who swallowed their dignity for the sake of keeping the peace. Mascot. The word stuck in my throat like a splinter. When I finally stood, I wiped my eyes on my sleeve, folded Arthur's sweater with care, and replaced it on the shelf. I stepped out into the hallway, intent on clearing my face before rejoining the others, when Lois appeared from around the corner, her expression unreadable. She held out an envelope. "This was on the kitchen counter just under Blythe's bag," she said quietly. "I saw your name. Figured you should have it." I took it without speaking. Once she walked away, I turned it over. My name was written in the grantor line. It was a power of attorney form. Drafted, filled, signed by Blythe. Not submitted yet, but prepared. For control of my finances, my decisions, my life. The fuse, long trailing, had finally reached the dynamite. I waited until the house was asleep. Until the last bathroom light clicked off, the hallway creaked under someone's socks, and the cicadas outside sang without interruption. Then I moved. My first stop was the kitchen tablet. I opened the app Blythe had hidden in plain sight and took a series of photos, screen by screen, detail by detail. Logs of my searches, screenshots of my journal entries, even voice-to-text transcripts from when I read aloud in the pantry. She hadn't just monitored, she had stalked my thoughts. Next, I retrieved Garrett's old phone from the drawer under the bread box. The group chat was still there. Family LOLs, still filled with memes mocking my baking, my clothes, my adorable 1950s energy. I printed everything from the desktop computer Arthur and I used to use for taxes. Each page curled as it slid from the printer. Commentary, timestamps, text chains. I filed them neatly into manila folders labeled like gardening guides. Root rot, poison ivy, unnatural pruning. Then I hid them. Some pages went between the chapters of my heirloom seed guides. Arkansas Traveler tomatoes, Midnight Cosmos, Carolina Cross watermelon. Others slid under the floorboards in the guest room closet, beneath the loose third plank where Arthur once stashed the Christmas fund. Each hiding place felt sacred, symbolic, a whisper of resistance tucked into the spaces I'd once filled with obedience. In the living room, I opened my old journal and wrote in block letters, "Silence is not virtue, it's surrender." I pinned it inside the cabinet behind the coffee mugs, taped to the back wall. Then another. "They turned you into a mascot. You were a mother." That one went behind the pantry door, right where my hand reached every morning. Sticky notes bloomed through the house like dandelions in spring. Next came the voice memos. I sat in the shed, recording moments from memory. Blythe's tone when she corrected Jamie's grammar, Garrett's eyes darting away when Blythe called me our little mascot. Lila whispering, "She gets mad when we're alone." I locked them inside a digital recorder and labeled it Arthur's Seeds, 2007. No one would look there. The last note I wrote was the hardest. A folded piece of paper, handwritten in the dark. "Arthur, you said once, you don't owe them your silence. I'm finally ready to believe you." I placed it in the pocket of his old cardigan, folded in the pantry. The next morning, I met Lois for coffee at her house across the lake. She poured it into thick white mugs, the kind that didn't match but held more warmth than any matching set ever could. "I think I'm ready," I said quietly. She nodded and opened her address book, flipping to a page near the back. "Her name is Genevieve. She's a probate attorney, and she's as mean as she is brilliant." I smiled. Good. Genevieve met me that afternoon, in her office lined with case files and feminist poetry quotes printed in typewriter font. She didn't blink when I handed her the envelope. She scanned the documents quickly. Photos, chat logs, hidden app screenshots. "You have more than enough," she said. "And you're still living in the home alone?" "For now. But I don't feel alone." She nodded. "We'll file for legal protection of your estate and begin the paperwork for a formal eviction. I'll draw up limits for power of attorney. You'll need to restructure your will." I exhaled slowly. "Let's do it." As she began the paperwork, I reached into my purse and pulled out a seed packet. Midnight Cosmos. "They only bloom at dusk," I said. "But when they do, they change everything around them." Genevieve smiled. "Then let's start at sunset." It happened just after lunch, an hour when the sun slanted across the front steps and the cicadas grew loud enough to drown out thought. I'd spread the documents across the dining table. Property deeds, new power of attorney papers with Genevieve's signature at the bottom, drafts of my amended will, and the final forms for Blythe's eviction, sealed and ready for filing. I didn't hear the front door open. "Mom?" Garrett's voice snapped the air like a twig. He stood in the entryway, eyes falling to the table, his face tightening with each second. "What is this?" I moved slowly, placing a folder over the signatures. "It's something I should have done years ago." His eyes flicked from the papers to my face. "You're going behind our backs?" "No," I said evenly. "I'm finally standing in front of myself. You're turning on your family." "That's not what this is." He stepped forward, voice rising. "What is it then? You want control? Money? You want to punish Blythe because you feel left out at dinner?" I stared at him. "I want safety, autonomy. I want to know my thoughts are my own and not monitored like a teenager under house arrest. I want to stop shrinking in my own home." He laughed bitterly. "This is overreaction. She's your daughter-in-law, not your jailer." "You chose a partner who erased your mother and you didn't blink," I snapped, the words spilling before I could soften them. "You stood beside her as she mocked me. You watched her dismantle my role in this family and called it modernity. She raised our kids while you arranged table settings." "No," I said, low and sharp. "She arranged narratives. You just didn't bother to read them." His jaw clenched. "You've always had a way of playing victim." That stopped me cold. "Victim?" I whispered. "You like the drama. You always did. That's why Dad handled things. You were delicate." "Your father never called me delicate," I said. "He called me the backbone." Before he could reply, the front door swung open. Blythe entered like a storm disguised as breeze. Perfect posture, keys in one hand, eyes laser-focused on the tension in the room. "What's going on?" Garrett opened his mouth, but I spoke first. "He found the documents." Her gaze dropped to the files. She didn't flinch. "So it's true. It's all legal," I said. "And it's done." "You're making a mistake," she replied coolly. "And you'll regret it." Garrett stood between us now, unsure of where to look. Blythe dropped her keys on the side table with a practiced clink. "You want to make this ugly? We can make it ugly. I will challenge every clause. I will fight guardianship. I will file for mental review if I have to." "You'd question my capacity while spying on my devices?" "Protecting our children," she said through clenched teeth. "They came to me," I said. "And you knew they did. That's why you tried to shut me down." She stepped closer. "This ends one of two ways, quietly or legally, but it ends on our terms." "No," I said. "It ends on mine." At that moment, Dean stepped through the back door, a glass of lemonade in his hand, sun hat still askew from gardening. "What's all this?" he asked. Garrett looked to him, face raw. "She's trying to evict Blythe, rewriting her will." Dean blinked, then scoffed. "You're not serious." "I am," I said. He turned to me. "Caroline, this is beyond you. This is petty, vindictive. You've always been fragile, but this?" I swallowed hard. "Don't." "No," he continued. "This is manipulation. You're pulling at the kid's heartstrings, turning Lois against everyone, rewriting history to make yourself the martyr. It's pathetic." My vision blurred, but I refused to look away. Blythe folded her arms. "Dean sees it. Garrett sees it. You're the only one who doesn't." That night, I sat alone on the porch again, the files tucked away, my thoughts turbulent and unfinished. My phone buzzed once, a voice memo from Jamie. I clicked play. His whisper crackled through the speaker. "When I get scared, I pretend I'm with you, like when the lights go out or when Mommy gets mad." The world tilted. Everything I needed to hear fit in those 17 words. He saw me, and I would not fail him. The room was colder than I expected, air-conditioned and clinical, with the hum of fluorescent lighting and the scent of overused upholstery cleaner. The long conference table was cleared except for 3 water bottles, a stack of legal folders, and a small bowl of peppermints that no one touched. Genevieve sat to my left, dressed in navy and focused, her pen poised. Across from us, Blythe and Garrett flanked their own attorney, a younger man with slicked back hair and too many notes. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a soft but authoritative voice, sat at the head of the table. I placed my hands on my lap to stop them from trembling. This wasn't a court of law. It wasn't even an official deposition. But it felt like standing on trial for my own worth. Genevieve began. "We've submitted the materials ahead of time," she said, sliding a thick folder toward the mediator. "But for clarity, I'd like to walk through the key items." She opened the folder. The paper hissed softly, like something exhaling before it spoke. "First," she said, "are screenshots of a monitoring application installed without Caroline's consent on 2 shared family devices. These include keylogging software, GPS tracking, and audio monitoring." The mediator raised a brow. "Installed by?" Genevieve looked across the table. "All evidence suggests Blythe Reynolds." Blythe crossed her arms. "For safety, the children use those devices." Genevieve nodded. Yet the focus of the log centers around Caroline's journal entries, private messages, and browser searches, not child-related content. Next came the group chats. Genevieve passed printed copies across the table. Lines highlighted in pink glowed like bruises under the overhead light. "Mascot energy, all day every day." "Do we think she irons her pillowcases too?" "Margot-level delusion with a side of apple pie." I didn't flinch. I'd read them 100 times, but watching Garrett's eyes lower as he read them, that shook me. He didn't defend them. He didn't speak. He just folded the pages and placed them face down. "Finally," Genevieve said, sliding forward a USB stick. "We have a voice memo submitted anonymously by Caroline's grandson Jamie. It is included at his request." The mediator clicked her pen. "We'll listen privately after today's session." Blythe snorted. "So now we're using 6-year-olds as witnesses?" "Children often tell the truth adults are too afraid to say," Genevieve replied calmly. The mediator turned to me. "Caroline, would you like to speak on your own behalf?" I took a breath. I have spent decades being agreeable, being small, being useful, and somewhere along the way I forgot how to be visible. I believed that if I gave enough, they'd protect me in return. I looked directly at Garrett. "But I gave and none of you noticed I was disappearing." Garrett opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked down at the table, jaw tight. Blythe rolled her eyes. "This is ridiculous. She's just mad because she's not in charge anymore." "She owns the house," Genevieve said. "She's deadweight," Blythe snapped. The room went silent. Even the mediator blinked. Garrett didn't defend me, but he didn't defend her either. The mediator folded her hands. "I've reviewed the documentation and the statements. Based on the invasive surveillance, the atmosphere of psychological coercion, and the clear violation of Caroline's autonomy, I'm issuing the following recommendation. Blythe and Garrett Reynolds are to be temporarily removed from the property, effective immediately. They may request mediation review in 60 days. Until that time, Caroline Reynolds is to retain full authority over the estate, including all decision-making rights." Garrett looked like he'd been slapped. Blythe shot up from her chair. "You're joking." The mediator didn't flinch. "I'm not." Genevieve quietly packed the folders. I stood slowly. My legs didn't shake this time. Outside, the sun had returned, brighter than I remembered, warmer, and this time, it rose for me. The first morning after the mediation, I stood at the threshold of my own kitchen and just breathed. No footsteps behind me. No device chiming with alerts I didn't set. No tension curled beneath my skin like a second spine. Just the tick of the wall clock and the smell of percolating coffee. Sunlight poured through the windows I'd kept shuttered for too long. I opened every curtain, every blind. Let the house inhale. Lila and Jamie arrived 2 days later. Temporary arrangement, they called it. But the moment Lila dropped her suitcase on the hallway rug and Jamie wrapped his arms around my waist without a word, I knew temporary had changed its meaning. I let them choose their rooms. Lila picked the attic nook, tiny and odd-angled, but perfect for her reading chair and stuffed animal kingdom. Jamie chose the sunroom. I moved the pots and plants and gave him paint supplies. "I want to paint the whole window," he announced. "You can," I said. "Nana's rules now." They both froze. Then Lila grinned. "Can we make a sign?" We did. 3, actually. Nana's rules in crayon and glitter across thick cardstock. They hung one on the front door, one above the kitchen sink, one on the pantry door. Rule number 1, no whispering. Rule number 2, say the big feelings. Rule number 3, pancakes on Tuesdays. I added rule number 4 later, write it down. I enrolled in an online writing workshop called Memoir as Healing. We met every Thursday night via webcam. Women in different corners of the country, all piecing together forgotten versions of themselves. My instructor's name was Regina. She had a soft voice but gave the sharpest critiques. She read one of my excerpts, a page about Blythe silencing my stories at dinner, and circled just one sentence. "You buried this. Now dig it up." So I did. I wrote about my mother's mirror-polished anger, about Arthur's quiet loyalty, about Garrett's birth and how, when he was handed to me swaddled and screaming, I thought, he will never feel invisible. I titled the first chapter "The Mascot at the Table." Outside, the yard came back to life. Jamie planted marigolds in the herb bed and named each one after a Star Wars character. Lila read aloud on the back porch, her voice carrying into the hydrangeas. I replaced the cameras with wind chimes, turned off the voice monitors and opened the windows. Even the house seemed to exhale. Then one afternoon, Dean showed up. He didn't knock, just stepped onto the porch, hat in hand, eyes lowered. "I brought tomatoes," he said, holding up a basket. I nodded, stepping aside. He sat, didn't speak at first. Then, I knew. About Blythe. I blinked. "You what?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. I saw things, heard things, little comments. The way she talked about you when she thought no one was listening. The way Garrett stopped calling unless she reminded him. "You never said a word." He flinched. I didn't want to be next. Silence fell between us. He finally looked up. I was a coward. I studied him for a long moment. Then I said, "Yes, you were." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I know." He didn't stay long, left the tomatoes and went. That night, I sliced them for a salad. Lila helped arrange basil leaves just so. Jamie stood on a stool, drizzling balsamic like an artist. Dean's silence had cost me years, but mine had cost even more. Not anymore. Now, everything in this house had a name again, and none of them were Mascot. I wrote the letter on a rainy Sunday, at the small desk Arthur built me when we first moved into the house. The same one where I used to track grocery lists, pencil in appointments, and write thank you notes that always felt too short. This one wasn't short. "Arthur, I don't know where to begin, except with the truth I never said out loud when you were here. You were the only one who ever really saw me. And still, I let the world forget I had a voice. Maybe I thought that was love, quietness, adaptability, but now I know love doesn't require erasure. You warned me about Blythe, about the way silence makes room for cruelty. I heard you, but I wasn't ready to act. Not until she looked at me like I was a souvenir from someone else's story. I'm not anymore. I'm the author now." I folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it between the pages of his favorite book, The Old Man and the Sea. He'd always loved stories about survival. The next day, I drove alone to a hilltop cemetery just outside town. It was quiet, freshly mowed, the kind of place that felt suspended in its own weather. My mother's headstone stood between two smaller unmarked graves. She would have liked the symmetry. I stood there a long while, no umbrella, just the light mist settling into my cardigan. "I used to think your silence was strength," I whispered. "Now I know it was fear." I reached into my pocket and placed a single gardenia at her grave. She never liked cut flowers, said they were too dramatic. But I brought one anyway. "I broke it," I said aloud. "The cycle stops with me." I walked away without looking back. When I returned home, a letter was waiting in the mailbox. The envelope was plain, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Garrett's, slanted slightly left, the same as when he was 10. "Mom, I don't know how to make this right. I don't even know where to start. I've been replaying things you said, things I dismissed. You deserved better. You were the compass in our family, and I let someone reset the direction without question. Lila asked about you yesterday. She said your house feels like music. I didn't know what she meant until she drew a picture of wind chimes and pancakes and the word safe over the roof. That's what you gave us. What I let go of. I'm sorry for my silence, for not seeing sooner. I want to be different. I want to learn, if you'll let me." I placed the letter in the same drawer that held Jamie's voice memo. The children were already shifting the world. Maybe he would too. A week later, I stood in front of a small crowd in the town hall auditorium. The folding chairs were half full. Mostly women, a few quiet men, a couple of teenagers holding clipboards. Behind me, a banner read, "Voices Raised, Family Systems and Covert Abuse." I adjusted the mic. My hands didn't shake. "I spent 65 years thinking the best thing I could be was agreeable," I began. "Pleasant, helpful, seen but not heard, until someone called me a mascot. And I realized I'd become exactly that, cheerful, forgettable, background." There were murmurs. Someone at the back wiped their eyes. "I want you to know, this isn't a story about villains. This is a story about patterns and what happens when you wake up and realize you're part of one that doesn't serve you anymore." I read passages from my memoir in progress, shared stories about hiding notes in seed catalogs, listening to confessions from a 6-year-old who knew too much, and choosing to speak, finally. When I finished, the room was silent. Then came applause, not loud, but full. Afterward, a young woman approached me with trembling fingers and said, "My grandmother's going through the same thing. I didn't know how to help her, but now, maybe I do." I gave her my card and a hug, and as I walked out into the evening, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like a matriarch, with voice, with strength, with fire, with... The grill sizzled gently, smoke curling into the golden summer light, mingling with the smell of rosemary chicken and grilled peaches. Mason jars clinked on the long picnic table as Lila arranged napkins into little swans, and Jamie proudly placed his "Nana's Lemonade, No Adults Allowed" sign at the cooler. The backyard buzzed, not with chaos, but with ease. The kind that comes when no one's watching their words too carefully or glancing toward a voice that might slice through joy. It was peaceful, the way still water feels deep. Dean stood by the fire pit with Lois, laughing over a story from their childhood that involved bicycle crashes and a too-curious skunk. Lois wore one of my old aprons, stained and worn at the edges, and hummed as she plaited corn on the cob. Garrett came, late, quiet. He stayed close to the fence at first, eyes lowered, offering to refill drinks and slice watermelon without being asked. He greeted Lila and Jamie gently, hugging them like someone relearning tenderness. When he caught my gaze across the lawn, he didn't speak. He just nodded. I nodded back. Blythe didn't come. No one asked why. And for the first time in my memory, her absence didn't haunt the edges of the day. It didn't hover like a threat or a disappointment. It just wasn't. Inside, the walls had transformed. Lila's drawings lined the hallway, crayon stick figures, bright flowers, animals with names like Hope Fox and Grandmouse. Jamie's paint-splattered paper hung near the kitchen, one corner curled and coated with glitter glue. The formal living room, once sterile and stiff, now held beanbags, chalkboards, and a makeshift reading fort made of old quilts and broomsticks. Above the fireplace, someone, probably Lois, had taped a construction paper sign that read, Home is where we speak freely. I walked barefoot through it all. No shoes, no apron, no one to shrink for, just me. My feet in the soil, my skin warmed by the sun, my voice finally mine. As dusk settled, the fire pit crackled to life and the children gathered for s'mores. Lila offered Dean the first one, slightly burned. Jamie melted 2 marshmallows together and declared it double sweet justice. I sat in the garden, watching it all, my old writing journal in my lap. The final chapter complete, the pages full, the story, for once, mine to end. I had written about all of it: Arthur's voice in the void, Blythe's sarcasm sharpened like glass, Garrett's silence, and Jamie's whisper in the dark. I had written about my mother and her cold beauty, about hiding in the shed, about the small rebellions, a post-it note behind a coffee mug, a voice memo no one knew existed. And now, here it was. A memoir not for validation, but for truth. A story not of a victim, but of a reclamation. The voices behind me blurred into music and memory, and my own words rose softly in my mind. You don't owe loyalty to a cage. You owe truth to yourself. I looked around. The warm eyes, the casual laughter, the art on the walls, the smell of tomatoes and thyme and burnt sugar. And I knew. This was not just a cookout. It was the first day of the life I should have always had. I closed the journal gently, smoothing the cover with my palm. Then I whispered into the gathering dark. Not your mascot anymore. What if the person keeping peace is the one silently breaking? If this story stirred something unspoken in you, don't silence it. There's more where this came from. More truths, more voices, more reckonings. Stick with us. We're not done unmasking the families we were told to protect at any cost.